Randy Leach disappeared.
Randy Leach was last seen at this fairly isolated house just about 10 miles from where he lives.
Outrun Randy! Outrun Randy!
Nobody saw him drinking. Nobody saw him leave. Nobody's seen him since.
Posters with Randy's picture are up all over town.
Summer is supposed to be a time for barbecues, block parties, bonfires, and fun memories being made with family and friends. The class of '88 was preparing for graduation in the small rural town of Linwood, Kansas, and many were ready to celebrate with friends. A graduation party scheduled for April 15th at a farm just outside of Linwood was the topic of conversation, and everyone had been talking about it for weeks. Little would anyone know this party would be the subject of conversation for decades to come, as not everyone at the party would make it home that night. Many strange occurrences would follow in the months after, and lives would be shattered. This is the case and mysterious disappearance of Randy Leach. A big hello to all you true crime fans out there. I'm your host, Heather.
And I'm Danielle.
And you're listening to the very first episode of Gone in a Blink.
Woohoo!
We are very, very excited about this. So today's story is about Randy Leach and takes place in the tiny town of Linwood, Kansas.
Randy Wayne Leach was born on July 25th, 1970. Randy Wayne Leach was last seen by his parents, Harold and Alberta, on April 15th, 1988 in Linwood, Kansas. He had just gotten a John Deere lawnmower the day before, and his dad had given him $20 to go buy some wax for it at Kmart. Randy showered and then got ready to go out for the evening. Randy headed out in his parents' gray four-door Dodge 500. 7 p.m. Randy stops by his cousin's house, then drives around Linwood. Not, very, very hard to do because it's such a small town. The population, so we found, was 377, but Heather and I are actually from this area, just out in the country. And I don't know, Heather, do you seriously think that there's almost 400 people in that town?
Maybe around the outskirts, there's probably that many if you're counting people in the rural areas right outside of the actual town of Linwood, I would say.
My guess is in the actual town, I just thinking back then, because, we used to... Our idea of cruising Linwood was on our Huffies, so, really, maybe 200 people. That in the actual town.
Back then, this is the 80s. This was in the 80s. So, yeah, I can't imagine there being too much more than that, really.
And I don't even know if Randy and his family lived in the actual town. Just kind of the reports that I found that their house was even, off the highway there. They're kind of part of that rural population as well. But anyways, so 8:30, Randy meets up with his friend by the name of Steve Daughtry, and together they drove to the local body shop in nearby town of DeSoto, where a red 1966 Ford Mustang was being restored. This was to be Randy's graduation gift from Harold and Alberta. I want to note that Steve Daughtry was, not exactly Randy's age.
No, I believe he was in his mid-30s, if I'm not mistaken.
That's a bit of a red flag to me right there, too. What is a 30-something-year-old hanging out with, a kid still in high school?
Exactly.
And maybe it holds no weight, but, definitely a thought, worth mentioning.
Absolutely.
9:30, Randy stops by Stout's Corner, a convenience store in Linwood, and purchases 2 candy bars, 2 bottles of soda, and $3 in gas.
$3 in gas back then probably got you quite a bit. Today, $3 isn't even going to move your gas gauge.
I don't think so. I think that the last time I got gas, it was maybe like $3.60 a gallon. So really not going to move nothing.
So at 10 p.m., Randy was seen at a graduation party bonfire in rural Leavenworth County, just west of Bonner Springs. And there were an estimated 150 people attending this party, hosted by high school senior Kim Irwin and her mother, Annie Irwin. It is important to note, though, that there were only approximately 33 students in Randy's graduating class, and that a large portion of the attendees at the Irwin party were friends of the Irwins who were originally from the Kansas City area. So, as stated in Adventures with Purpose, Annie Irwin had mixed up a spiked punch with vodka to sell to attendees. Other reports state that she was selling these drinks for $3 per cup with free refills. So, I don't know if that's exactly responsible, being the adult hosting the party and selling a bunch of teenagers vodka and punch with free refills.
Okay, so you have to remember something, though. 1, this was the 1980s. And 2, this is a small town. Knowing people from that time that kind of went to school, I guess around the time as Randy, there was nothing to do. So they'd get together on the weekends and just drink.
Pretty much.
So I guess maybe still not responsible, but I guess, hey, whatever makes the money, right?
Absolutely. And I think we probably all had that one person, that one friend whose mom kind of went in that direction too. But at any rate, so according to the In Search of Randy Leach website, Annie stated that she saw Randy that night and he did seem to have trouble walking. However, he didn't seem drunk and was never seen with the drink in his hand. By 1:30 a.m., now on April 16th, Randy's good friend and fellow partygoer, Leanne, notices Randy is not acting right. She described in an interview on Adventures with Purpose as Randy acting as if he had been roofied. She explained that he was trying to locate his car keys but had seemed to have lost his fine motor skills and was unable to put his hands in his pockets to search for the keys. She went on to explain that she checked Randy's pockets for his keys and didn't find anything. So Leanne tells Randy that she will give him a ride home and proceeds to help him to her car. She then tells Randy that she needs to use the restroom really quick, so she locks him in her car and makes her way back up to the house. She was only gone for about 15 minutes when she returned to her car, and when she got back to her car, all of her doors were still locked except for the passenger side door where Randy had been sitting, and Randy was gone. And she wasn't up there at the house very long, so it makes you wonder, was he able to get out of the car himself? Did somebody help him out of the car?
Yeah, but Heather, if all of the other doors were locked except the passenger side door, I mean, even though it was 1988, I think they still had power locks or the one she just pushed up. That shows that he pushed that up. Nobody else was in there. When you're a little inebriated, okay, that, sometimes your different senses take over. And so you're feeling like really bad one minute. Maybe he found his keys all of a sudden and just popped it open.
Well, I mean, she said on Adventures with Purpose that she checked his pockets because he couldn't even get his hands in his pockets. So she didn't find his keys in his pockets. I mean, I guess anything is a possibility and we are completely just speculating, but it just seems weird to me that he couldn't get his hands in his pockets, but yet he managed to pull pull up on the knob to unlock the car door and get himself out. And you would think if he was pretty messed up, like it sounds like he was, then he would have been, 15 minutes. She was gone 15 minutes. That's what I can't wrap my head around. She comes back 15 minutes later, and you would think if he got himself out of the car, he wouldn't have made it far. I wouldn't think, unless he had some help.
Well, and you're not wrong on that. Okay, so even if he did get himself out of the car, I feel like he still would have been roaming around the property a bit. I think on the other side of that then, okay, let's do that scenario that he did get help getting out of the car. Do you think that fellow partygoers that were probably drinking as well would have been mindful enough to go and lock every other car door and just keep his open?
I don't feel like they were probably even paying attention to him at that point. I don't even think that they would have known that he was in her car. That's what's so strange about it, is that he managed to get out, whether it was with help or not, and then just disappeared, completely disappeared in that short 15-minute window.
And that's what's so hard, is that we're left just to speculate, because after that, right, nobody else saw him.
Nobody did. So after she had gone back to her car and realized that Randy was gone, she spent the next 45 minutes searching the area outside of the Irwin home, as well as every room inside the house. But Randy was nowhere to be found. So she then decided to spend approximately another 45 minutes driving all the dark country roads and looking for any clue as to where Randy had gone. Now, I would also like to note that in the timeline of events, from several other sources I found online, another partygoer by the name of John Burns had already approached Randy and had offered to take him home. Some of the info I've been able to gather is a little conflicting between the hours of 1:30 and 2 o'clock. Leanne and John Burns each had come across Randy around the same time, but it seems like on separate occasions. And he was stumbling around and unable to find his keys. Now, one source claimed that John offered to take Randy home, but Randy was in line to use the restroom, so he told him he would take another kid home and then return to pick Randy up. But when he returned, both Randy and his car were gone. It is definitely possible that John Burns had offered to take Randy home and had already left to take the other partygoer home before Leanne had talked to Randy and put him in her car. But then when John Burns returned to the party to pick Randy up, Randy was already missing and Leanne was out searching for him at that time. So I feel like with that, no one's wrong. I feel like they probably both approached him at completely separate times and offered to take him home, maybe not even knowing or realizing that the other had offered to take him home.
Well, right. It sounds like their stories are pretty consistent, though.
Yeah, they're pretty consistent. And then I guess Annie Irwin had mentioned seeing him in line to use the restroom also. But it was just that the timing was kind of conflicting. And I know, people are trying to replay the whole scenario and when they last saw Randy or, what was going on. And timing can get a little off. And I get that, They weren't really paying a lot of attention to that at the moment because who would have known that, something like this was going to happen. But so at 6 a.m., Alberta Leach wakes to discover that Randy was not in his bed. She wakes Harold, and together they go outside and see if the car Randy had been driving was in the driveway. It was not there. So while standing in their driveway trying to absorb the fact that their son never came home that night, they spot Steve Daughtry drive by their house and then pass behind the Leach's house at an incredibly slow rate of speed. He was driving approximately 10 miles per hour, where the speed limit is posted as being 55 miles per hour. And that's a highway. That's not a little rural country road. That's a highway. And so that would seem pretty odd. And it got even more odd later on when Harold and Alberta found out who that actually was that was driving that slow. So Harold hadn't really given it much thought at the time, but then, as I mentioned later on, when he found out it was Steve Daughtry and realized that Steve Daughtry was one of the last ones to see his son alive, it became very, very suspicious.
Well, so by 7 a.m., Alberta's brother Richard Rose, who was a police officer with the Lawrence PD, is called and arrives at the Irwin home. In a 1998 interview, when referring to the Irwins, he told the Lawrence Journal-World they wouldn't do anything to help me. The ground was swept and raked and everything put away. No cups, no cans. You couldn't have told there was a party there. Moving forward on 4/17, so April 17th, Randy's parents reported him missing after waiting the mandatory 24-hour period. April 18th.
I don't mean to cut you off. Can I just say, waiting 24 hours, I've never understood that. Especially when you hear that the first 48 hours is the most crucial. So if you're required to wait 24 hours before reporting someone missing, you've already lost half that time that is deemed the most crucial part.
You make a really good point there, because exactly that. I mean, I don't know how many times that I've heard that first 48, that if something's going to happen, it's going to be then. And so for police, or however that procedure is, to make you wait the 24 hours, I get it to a certain extent. Like, let's say like with an adult, that, I don't know, here lately you've heard a lot about like people that are reported missing and then it turns out they weren't really missing. They just didn't want to be found. But, you know, especially in children, that to wait that 24 hours, I mean, I think that that's just a really crucial period.
Absolutely.
So on April 18th, police began seeking info on a 6'2", 200-pound, 17-year-old white male with blue eyes, brown hair, a mole on his left earlobe. Last seen wearing a blue t-shirt, blue jeans, and white tennis shoes, and driving a gray four-door Dodge 500.
Rumors then began to swirl in regards to what may have happened to Randy. And when I say rumors, I mean there were a lot of rumors.
I was literally, I don't know, like 5 or 6 years old at the time, and I remember hearing the rumors, not exactly knowing what they meant, of course.
Everyone had a theory. So the first big one that everyone was talking about was the talk of satanic rituals happening at the party that night, and those rumors began to spread like wildfire. What was known as satanic panic began making its way around the small town of Linwood and surrounding areas, and rumors involving cult activity taking place in some of the caves near where the party had taken place began to surface.
Wouldn't you say that satanic panic was already happening around that time, though? I mean, I seem to remember reports of, you know, weird things happening in barns and things like that didn't even involve Randy. So, I mean, before any of this.
Yes, I think that era, it was something about that era. It was everywhere. Satanic panic wasn't restricted to Linwood or, you know, one particular place. Anytime I felt like back then, anything even close to what happened in the Randy Leach case happened, I feel like they blamed, it's, you know, they're Satanists. And there's been other cases, the West Memphis 3, that one out of West Memphis, Arkansas, where 3 little boys were violently slaughtered, basically. And the 3 accused were accused of performing satanic rituals. And another thing is they would say, if you listen to heavy metal music, play Dungeons and Dragons, that type of thing, then that puts you high on the serial killer list or high on the suspect list just based on that. So there was a lot of that type of stuff.
Even based on Dungeons and Dragons? I thought that was more of like a role-playing game.
That's what I I don't know much about it, but
Right.
I think it is. But for some reason, well, you know, and like if you listen to, what was it back then? If you listen to Metallica, then you must be a Satanist and possibly a serial killer. It was that mentality back then. But that was one of the many things that were going around, one of the many rumors. Before long, many incredibly strange occurrences began happening, though. And the first one would be the fact that, and the biggest one, in my opinion, is the fact that the party had been cleaned up so quickly with absolutely no signs at all that a party had even taken place.
I wonder, and I don't know if we have record of this or not, did they like announce to the Irwins that they were coming over? So Alberta's brother, did she or him call there first? So like they had time to prepare, or?
I'm not 100% sure, and nothing I found really stated whether or not she had called first, but I know that there were sources that mentioned when she went over there, Annie Irwin, this is allegedly, but Annie Irwin allegedly offered her a beer at, I don't know, 8 o'clock in the morning, 7:30, whatever time it was, and was pretty nonchalant about everything. But I guess I feel like it's very odd that the party would go till, I don't know, we had reports of partygoers still being there between 1:30 and 2 in the morning. And so the fact that the party was cleaned up so early the next morning and no trace of a party even happening just is extremely strange to me.
Well, right. That's why I was wondering that, I mean, if they kind of called first, I could see both ways of just showing up to try to figure out what's going on. But I could also see Randy's mom calling and saying, hey, where's my son? Since this was the last place that he had been seen. So, but if they called first, then that would maybe give them a chance to clean up. Maybe not as well as they did. It sounds like they were really trying to make it look like no party took place.
Yeah, that's what it sounded like to me. It was very strange. So another strange occurrence that took place was the fact that the Irwin house burned to the ground not that long after Randy disappeared. And, you know, that's incredibly weird. That's incredibly weird. And I couldn't find anything stating exactly how long after Randy disappeared, but everything I found said as, quote, it burned to the ground not long after the party, unquote. So, and that was from the Lawrence Journal-World, and that was quoted by Leavenworth County Sheriff Herb Nye. So the next morning, the party is completely picked up to the point where you can't even tell there was a party. And shortly after that, the entire place burns to the ground. So very, very suspicious. So the Leaches didn't feel that the Leavenworth County Sheriff's Department was doing enough to help in the investigation. Fox 4 News reported that it took Leavenworth County authorities 5 weeks before they searched the Irwin house. And you heard that right, 5 weeks.
That's crazy.
5 weeks. So soon after, though, internal police reports began showing up in the Leach's mailbox from an unidentified source. And Harold had told the Lawrence Journal-World at the time that he didn't know where the source of the documents came from, but that he believed they were from a sympathetic officer who was convinced the investigation was botched. And I'm pretty certain to this day, anyone that's familiar with the case, or even if you're not super familiar with the case and you just happen to read it and kind of see the timeline of events, see what happened, most people believe that this was botched by the Leavenworth County Sheriff's Department.
It really seems like it was. I mean, you know, if especially those are the only 2 accounts that we show of 150 people that we said that was at the party. Only 2 people have gone on record. Is that what we're saying?
Pretty much, yeah. Pretty much. So, in 1988, A man told police he had been abducted by Satanists. This is yet another very strange occurrence. He told police he had been abducted by Satanists and held captive for 2 weeks in a cave not far from where the party occurred. The man claimed his captors threatened to cut off his arm and showed him the corpse of a man hanging in the cave. Police searched the cave but found nothing. In the end, they claimed the man was on drugs and must have been hallucinating. The cave has since been bulldozed at the entrances, and, something kind of ironic about that. So now, today, that area right there is a haunted house. It's become a haunted house, and it's called Exile. And I think it's trails that go through the kind of wooded areas. I've never been, but I believe it's trails that go through the wooded areas around that area, and people jump out at you and, that type of thing. But I thought it was kind of ironic that is where you're going to have that.
That's very, very ironic. I wonder whoever owns that area now, if they kind of had that in mind.
Quite possibly. But so another occurrence is Steve Daughtry showed police in March of 1989 a severed foot in a tennis shoe on the banks of the Kansas River. He claimed he found it while strolling along the banks. Police searched the area and through DNA evidence determined that the foot was not Randy's. Daughtry, who was in his 30s when Randy disappeared, has since died.
Here's a thought, because a lot of the DNA technology from back then in the 80s was not as well developed as it is today. So much so, like in other cases, I just saw a report on John Benet Ramsey, that they are just now testing some DNA again because what was discovered in the 90s, the technology isn't as well as today. I wonder, and as I say this, I'm laughing, that I wonder whatever happened to that foot. Maybe they should check again.
Maybe they should. I do wonder, okay, it wasn't Randy's, but whose was it? It's not every day you are just going for a stroll and you find a severed foot in a tennis shoe.
Or that you keep a hold of that severed foot in a tennis shoe.
This is true also. So the Leaches, another very weird occurrence, is the Leaches replaced their Dodge 500 that Randy was driving on the night he disappeared with a Chrysler LeBaron, which only had about 40,000 miles on it. Just after buying the car, it caught fire and burned to the ground while parked in their backyard. So the Leaches believe it was arson, and that would make a lot of sense. So I don't know what they ruled that as. I don't think they ruled it as arson. So then Randy's blonde German Shepherd, who he named Crackers, went missing 4 months after Randy disappeared. His dog was never found. And then a Topeka man who had volunteered to help the Leaches in the search for Randy was found shot to death along with his wife, and police ruled that a murder-suicide. So a lot of things that just kind of tie in here in a very short amount of time, right. I believe, right after his disappearance. According to Fox 4 News, Edwardsville, which is a small town not far from Linwood at all,
but in a different county, right?
It is, yes, it's in a different county. So Edwardsville PD tried to assist in this search of the caves, but were quickly stopped by Leavenworth County, who threatened to arrest them if they interfered. And I'm sorry, but if there's a missing teenager, why would you threaten another police department who is trying to assist in this? I think that's one of the many things, that's one of the many reasons why people think that there's a cover-up, because it just doesn't make sense why you would threaten to arrest. First of all, how do you arrest a police department? That doesn't make sense to me either, but I don't understand that. I don't know if it's a territorial thing or what, but
that's what it sounds like, is that it was a territorial thing to a certain extent, But of course, if they had already botched the investigation for whatever reason or covering something up, you wouldn't want another police department coming in and, exposing you. So it's really hard to tell.
Yep. So according to the Tonganoxie Mirror, Leavenworth County officials refused to launch an inquisition into the Leach case. The Lawrence Journal-World listed reasons why an inquisition is justified in an editorial dated May 10th, 1990, saying, quote, something is fishy and officials have not told the complete story, unquote. KBI agent Timothy Dennis theorizes that Randy's judgment may have been impaired that night, causing him to get into an accident and drive off the road into nearby Stranger Creek, which is also possible, but...
Wouldn't they have found the car, though? I mean, that's kind of what I think. Anything is possible. If he did find the keys to his car, that he could have got a hold of it, and then that he wasn't going to be able to drive home, but then we would have at least found a car, I think.
Absolutely.
So to this date, no one who had attended the party had ever claimed to have seen Randy leave that night, and neither Randy nor his parents' car have ever been found. Harold Leach passed away in January 2021, never learning what happened to his beloved son. Now Alberta is left to continue their fight for answers with the hopes that one day she will finally get some closure in the decades-long search to find her only son.
If you have any information in this case, please come forward. You can remain completely anonymous, and even the smallest tips can help move this case forward and help get answers into what happened to Randy. If you have any information, please contact Alberta Leach at P.O. Box 596, Tonganoxie, Kansas 66086.
Or also, she has asked that anyone with information call her directly at 785-840-6270.
Thank you all for listening. If you like today's episode, please consider following us on any of our social media sites. You can find us on Facebook at Gone in a Blink Podcast or on Instagram at Gone in a Blink Pod. You can also send us an email at goneinablinkpod@gmail.com. And if you have some ideas for a show that you'd like us to cover, we would love to hear about it.
Thank you for tuning in, and please join us next week when we discuss an all-new case.